Welcome to Chapter 11. The resource crisis begins. Cyprus copper mines, declining 5% annually. 30 years until exhaustion. Bronze Age civilization depends on bronze. Depletion creates competition. Enhanced merchants recognize the pattern 12 years before baseline administrators. Strategic purchasing begins at 7 shekels per talent. Prices rise steadily, 157% inflation over 12 years. Baseline families can't afford basic tools. Enhanced families control 97% of the bronze reserves. This is the story of how information advantages become economic advantages. And how scarcity tests partnership after abundance barely maintained equity. Let's begin. Chapter 11. The resource crisis begins. 2835 BCE, 2 weeks after the Fertility Crisis Council. Anatolian copper mine, administrative center early morning. The copper was running out. Narm could calculate exactly when 5 years, 2 months, 17 days, at current extraction rates, while the baseline workers loading ore into baskets saw only abundance in tunnels that had produced wealth for 3 generations. He stood at the entrance to the main shaft, clay tablets spread across the administrative table, each one documenting what enhanced cognition could see with perfect clarity and what baseline perception would miss until crisis arrived. 45 years old. Third-generation mine administrator. His grandfather had opened these shafts when malachite veins ran thick as tree roots through the mountain stone. His father had expanded operations when demand from Mesopotamian foundries made copper more valuable than grain. Now Narm managed extraction from thinning deposits with each season's work, watching geological reality approach economic catastrophe while calculating precisely when mathematics would become an emergency. The morning sun angled through dust motes stirred by workers descending into darkness. 53 baseline humans begin their day hauling ore from tunnels that penetrated 300 meters into the mountain. Men and women who knew stone and sweat, who could judge ore quality by color and weight, who understood mining through generations of accumulated wisdom passed from father to son, mother to daughter. They saw abundance because the tunnels still produced. Because baskets are still filled with malachite and azurite. Because their labor still generated wealth that fed families and built futures. They couldn't see what Narm's enhanced cognition tracked with mathematical precision, that each basket represented fractionally less ore per worker hour than the previous season, that vein thickness decreased measurably with each meter of tunnel extension, and that the ratio of stone moved to copper extracted was approaching the threshold where mining became economically unsustainable. Enhanced cognition meant seeing patterns that baseline humans couldn't perceive until patterns became catastrophic. Narm reviewed the extraction data systematically. 5 years of records tracking ore quality, vein thickness, tunnel depth, worker productivity, and foundry demand. Numbers that told a story only enhanced by mathematics could read exponential depletion approaching a critical threshold with precision that made prediction certainty rather than an estimate. Year 1, average vein thickness 47 centimeters, ore concentration 23% copper by weight, 8.7 worker hours per basket of usable ore. Year 2, average vein thickness 41 centimeters, ore concentration 21% copper, 9.3 worker hours per basket. Year 3, average vein thickness 36 centimeters, ore concentration 19% copper, 10.1 worker hours per basket. Year 4, average vein thickness 31 centimeters, ore concentration 17% copper, 11.4 worker hours per basket. Year 5, average vein thickness 27 centimeters, ore concentration 15% copper, 13.2 worker hours per basket. The pattern was clear. Linear decline in vein quality, exponential increase in extraction cost. Within 5 years, the labor required would exceed the economic value of the copper produced. The mine would become unprofitable before it became physically exhausted, workers spending more time breaking stone than extracting metal, families earning less while working harder, and an entire community built around copper wealth facing collapse before they recognized the crisis approaching. Narm calculated forward with enhanced precision. Current extraction rate, 32 tons annually to Mesopotamian foundries. Current Mesopotamian demand, 217 tons annually from all sources. Anatolian contribution, 14% of the total supply. This mine specifically, 7% of Anatolian production, 1% of total Mesopotamian supply. 1% didn't sound catastrophic until enhanced cognition calculates cascade effects. He pulled additional tablets, trade network analysis he'd been documenting for 3 years. Mesopotamia imported copper from Oman, Cyprus, and Anatolia. Imported tin from Afghanistan, distant Cornwall. Bronze requires both metals in a 9-to-1 ratio, 90% copper, 10% tin. Any shortage in either metal constrained the entire Bronze Age economy. Oman deposits, depleting at a similar rate to Anatolian mines. Enhanced administrators there would be calculating similar timelines. Cyprus deposits, richer but more challenging to access. Underwater mining is beginning, but it is dangerous, expensive, and limited by baseline human lung capacity. Afghanistan tin, minimal deposits. 3 years of supply at current demand levels. Cornwall tin, abundant but distant. 18 months shipping time from the British coast to the Mesopotamian foundries. Weather, pirates, and political instability made the trade route unreliable. Enhanced cognition assembled the pieces into a comprehensive picture that baseline administrators would miss until it was too late. Within 5 years, the Mesopotamian foundries faced a copper shortage that would drive prices up by an estimated 40 to 60%. Within 3 years, the tin shortage would make bronze production impossible regardless of copper availability. Within a decade, the Bronze Age economy faced an existential crisis that would reshape civilization. And enhanced humans knew first. That was the advantage, and the moral question Naram couldn't quite dismiss, despite knowing his duty was to enhance survival rather than abstract partnership principles. Enhanced cognition meant seeing catastrophe approaching while baseline humans saw only today's production. Information advantage that could be used to help everyone prepare or to position enhanced populations for survival at baseline expense. Naram looked up as Darius approached, his assistant administrator, baseline human, 42 years old, competent within his capabilities, loyal, hard-working. Good man. Doing his best with cognition that couldn't process what enhanced mathematics made apparent. Morning production looks strong, Darius said, gesturing toward workers filling baskets with steady efficiency. Keshav's crew opened a new vein in the northern extension. Good color, decent thickness. Should maintain our monthly quota without difficulty. Naram nodded, accepting the assessment that was accurate on a daily timescale but catastrophically wrong on a longer horizon. Darius saw production maintaining current levels. Enhanced cognition saw production maintained briefly before collapsing. Both observations were accurate. The timescale determined which truth mattered. How long do you think the mine will produce? Naram asked, genuinely curious whether baseline estimation approached enhanced calculation. Darius considered the question with the practical wisdom of 3 generations of mining experience. My grandfather said these veins would last forever. My father said they'd last his lifetime. I guess. Another 20, 30 years? Maybe longer if we find new deposits deeper in the mountain. Why? Are you worried? 20 to 30 years. Baseline optimism based on current production rates without accounting for depletion acceleration, cost increase, or demand growth. Not stupid. Darius was intelligent by any measure. Just limited by cognition that couldn't model exponential curves or process multivariable analysis. He saw straight lines where enhanced cognition saw complex dynamics. Just thinking about long-term planning, Naram said, which was true if incomplete. Making sure we're prepared for any future challenges. The mine's been here 3 generations. It'll be here in 3 more, God willing. Darius smiled with confidence born of daily observation rather than mathematical projection. We find new veins regularly. There's always more copper deeper in the mountain. Except there wasn't. Geological surveys Naram had commissioned showed the copper-bearing formation ending approximately 400 meters below the current mining level. Deeper than current technology could safely mine. Further than baseline human endurance could sustain. Beyond economic viability, even if technically possible. But Darius didn't know that. Couldn't know that without enhanced cognition processing geological data, economic models, and technological constraints simultaneously. He saw today's production and assumed tomorrow would repeat indefinitely because human psychology defaulted to linear extrapolation from immediate experience. Enhanced cognition knew better. Saw further. Carried responsibility for the knowledge baseline humans lacked. And faced a choice about when to share that knowledge. Narm watched Darius return to managing daily operations, a good administrator handling present challenges without perceiving future catastrophe. Watched workers filling baskets with copper that would run out in 5 years, 2 months, and 17 days while they planned futures assuming abundance would continue. Watching the economic system operating smoothly toward a crisis, only enhanced cognition could see the approaching crisis. He returned to his calculations, documenting everything with precision so immortals could verify his projections. 5 years until copper depletion made this mine economically unviable. 3 years until the tin shortage constrained bronze production regardless of copper availability. 2 years until enhanced merchants who understood the mathematics controlled the remaining metal supplies through strategic purchasing. The question wasn't whether a crisis was coming. Mathematics made that sure. The question was who knew it was coming, who would benefit from knowing first, and whether partnership principles required sharing information that could cost enhanced families their survival advantage. Narm made his decision. He would first report to the Enhanced Merchant Council. Let enhanced leadership determine strategy before informing partnership councils. Give enhanced populations time to prepare, stockpile, and position for survival in scarcity that baseline populations wouldn't recognize until it's too late. Not a conspiracy. Just prudence. Those who saw the crisis first had the right to protect themselves first. That was natural law, biological advantage producing survival advantage. Enhanced cognition meant enhanced foresight, which meant enhanced preparation. Partnership could address equity after enhanced families secured survival. He packed the tablets carefully, already calculating travel time to Uruk, 3 days by caravan. The Enhanced Merchant Council met every 7th day. If he departed immediately, he could present findings at the next gathering. Give enhanced leadership 4 days to develop a strategy before the partnership councils receive the same information. 4 days head start, enough time for enhanced merchants to begin strategic copper purchases before prices rose. Enough time to stockpile against scarcity, baseline populations wouldn't anticipate, enough time to transform information advantage into economic advantage that would determine who survived the approaching shortage. The workers continued filling baskets, unaware that the copper they mined was running out. Unaware that enhanced administrator calculating their future had already decided their survival mattered less than enhanced survival. Unaware that partnership equality didn't extend to sharing information when information determined who lived and who starved. Narm left the mine as the morning sun climbed higher, carrying tablets that contained crisis only enhanced cognition could perceive and only enhanced loyalty would address first. The copper was running out. And enhanced humans would know before baseline humans could prepare. Uruk Merchant Guild Hall. 3 days later, evening. Enkidu listened to Narm's presentation with growing recognition that the 87% consolidation probability Nix had calculated wasn't just political theory, it was economic reality approaching with mathematical certainty. The Merchant Guild Hall hummed with enhanced cognition processing implications, faster than baseline administrators could articulate the problem. 37 enhanced merchants present, each calculating how copper scarcity would reshape trade networks, commodity prices, and competitive advantages. The clay tablets Narm had brought from Anatolia circulated through the gathering, enhancing memory and absorbing data that would require baseline council days to process. 5 years until the copper shortage. 3 years until the tin crisis. The Bronze Age economy depended on both metals, facing a simultaneous constraint that determined which populations survived and which faced economic collapse. Arwad spoke first, the enhanced merchant who coordinated most long-distance trade networks, 55 years old, carrying the accumulated wisdom of 3 decades of managing complexity that baseline merchants couldn't match. The question isn't whether a shortage happens. Mathematics makes that certain. The question is who controls remaining supplies when scarcity drives prices beyond baseline purchasing capacity. Nods around the chamber. Enhanced merchants' recognition of truth without needing an elaborate explanation. When resources became scarce, those who anticipated scarcity positioned themselves to survive it. That was basic economics, biological advantage producing market advantage. We should inform the partnership councils immediately, said Tamar, one of the younger enhanced merchants, 38 years old, still carrying idealism that experience hadn't yet complicated. Let baseline administrators begin preparing. Develop equitable distribution strategies. Ensure shortage doesn't create a humanitarian catastrophe. Ensure shortage doesn't create a humanitarian catastrophe, Arwad repeated, voice carrying a gentle correction rather than mockery. With what mechanism? Partnership councils can't create copper that doesn't exist. Can't stretch tin supplies beyond geological limits. Can't prevent scarcity through institutional declarations. The shortage is coming whether we inform councils immediately or prepare first. But if we prepare first, Tamar began. If we prepare first, enhanced families survive, Arwad interrupted. If we inform councils immediately, enhanced families compete with baseline populations for insufficient supplies while prices rise beyond both populations' capacity to pay. Equity sounds noble until it means watching your children starve because you shared information with populations who couldn't act on it effectively anyway. Harsh. True. The kind of biological pragmatism that partnership principles tried to constrain, but that scarcity would force into the open. Enkidu watched the debate with discomfort he couldn't quite articulate. This wasn't the entitled philosophy he'd articulated weeks ago at the enhanced gathering, the abstract argument about capability deserving authority. This was a concrete calculation about survival when there wasn't enough for everyone. Different moral terrain. More defensible. More dangerous. Ziva joined the debate, luxury goods trader, 42 years old, specializing in lapis lazuli and carnelian, materials that enhanced wealth but that baseline poverty couldn't afford. We're not discussing whether to inform the partnership. We're discussing when. If we begin strategic copper purchasing now, before prices rise, we secure supplies at current rates. If we wait for partnership debates about equitable distribution, we pay premium prices for whatever supplies remain after baseline panic buying. That's not hoarding, another merchant clarified, anticipating objection. That's prudent resource management based on superior information. We saw a crisis coming because our cognition processes patterns that baseline administrators miss. Should we suffer their slowness? Or use our advantages to ensure our families survive what's approaching? The logic was impeccable. The morality was complicated. The outcome was that families increased their copper stockpiles, while baseline families remained unaware that their livelihood was ending. Narm provided details that made abstract calculation concrete. Current copper prices, 7 silver shekels per talent. My projections show prices reaching 18 to 23 shekels per talent within 3 years as the shortage becomes obvious to baseline administrators. Enhanced merchants who purchase now at 7 shekels can either resell at dramatic profit or ensure family supplies regardless of future scarcity. How much should we stockpile? Someone asked. Depends on your family size, foundry needs, trade commitments, Narm replied. But general recommendation, secure a 3-year supply at minimum. 5-year supply if economically feasible. Assume tin shortage constrains bronze production before copper shortage becomes critical, but position for either scenario. Enhanced cognition process the calculation instantly. Current family consumption, projected needs, strategic reserve, resale opportunity. Mathematics that would take baseline administrators weeks to calculate is completed in seconds by minds designed for precisely this kind of complex analysis. Vote on proposal, Arwad said, moving toward a decision with efficiency that characterized enhanced governance. Begin strategic copper purchasing immediately. Inform partnership councils after enhanced families secure a minimum 3-year supply. Those in favor? 31 hands rose. Enhanced merchants are choosing family survival over partnership equity and choosing the advantage that biology provided, choosing to use information superiority the way any population would when scarcity threatened children. Those opposed? 6 hands rose, Tamar, among them, still clinging to principles that felt increasingly theoretical as the crisis became tangible. Proposal passes. Enhanced merchant families begin immediate copper stockpiling. Narm's data remains confidential until Arwad paused, calculating timeline. Until 2 weeks from today. Then we present findings to partnership councils. That gives enhanced families adequate time to secure supplies at current prices without creating artificial shortage through panic buying. 2 weeks delay in information that could help baseline families prepare, Tamar objected. 2 weeks gives everyone information after those who saw the crisis first had the opportunity to respond to what they saw, Arwad corrected. We're not stealing copper. We're not blocking baseline access. We're simply acting first on information our cognition obtained first. If baseline administrators had equivalent information processing, they'd do the same. Would they? Enkidu wasn't certain. The question assumed that baseline humans had enhanced cognitive calculating efficiency, greater family resource reserves, and greater network coordination capacity. Assumed biological equality that didn't exist. The fairness of we saw first, so we act first depended on whether the seeing itself was fair, whether the cognitive advantage that produced information advantage was merit or privilege. But the vote was done. Enhanced merchants were mobilizing. Strategic copper purchasing would begin tomorrow through trade networks that baseline administrators couldn't monitor effectively. The meeting continued with logistics coordination. Which merchants purchase from which sources? How to avoid an evident pattern that might alert baseline administrators prematurely. Optimal stockpile locations. Distribution networks for families who lack direct trade connections. The complex machinery of enhanced coordination operates with efficiency that partnership councils would require months to approximate. Chronos materialized at the chamber's edge, quantum presence announcing itself before physical form solidified. The immortal who valued efficiency, order, and systems. Who had voted against equal representation in the constitutional crisis. Who consistently argued that capability should determine outcomes. Efficient meeting, Chronos observed, his voice carrying approval rather than censure. You identified a crisis, calculated a response, and implemented a strategy. Enhanced governance operating as designed. We're delaying information that could help baseline families prepare, Enkidu said, articulating discomfort he couldn't fully rationalize. You're acting on information your cognition obtained through advantages that are biological reality, Chronos replied. Baseline humans can't process the multivariable analysis required to predict resource depletion accurately. You can. That capability difference isn't unfair, it's natural. Using your advantages isn't exploitation. It's survival. But what? Should enhanced families suffer because baseline families have inferior information processing? Should your children starve because they can't calculate as effectively? Partnership protects voting rights, legal rights, and political representation. It doesn't require you to ignore biological advantages when ignoring them means death. The logic was perfect. The conclusion felt wrong. Enkidu couldn't articulate why. Arwad approached, overhearing the exchange. The partnership was designed for abundance, he said quietly. When there's enough for everyone, equity is feasible. When there isn't enough, biology determines distribution. Enhanced cognition sees crisis first. Enhanced resources respond first. Enhanced families survive first. That's not tyranny. That's nature asserting itself through economic mechanisms instead of military ones. And baseline families? Enkidu asked. We'll have 2 weeks less preparation time because they have inferior cognition that doesn't process patterns as effectively. That's tragic. It's also a reality. We can't fix biology by ignoring the advantages it provides us. The merchants dispersed to begin strategic purchasing. Enhanced families mobilizing to secure survival against shortage, only enhanced cognition had predicted. Using biological advantage to obtain economic advantage and using information superiority to position for scarcity. Not a conspiracy. Just capability producing outcomes. Exactly as Chronos had always argued. Enkidu walked through Uruk's evening streets afterward, processing implications that felt simultaneously logical and catastrophic. The political consolidation he'd articulated weeks ago was manifesting economically. Enhanced advantages produce enhanced outcomes. Biology determines hierarchy despite institutional attempts to prevent it. He passed through the baseline quarter, when families went about their evening routines unaware that copper prices would quadruple before they recognized the shortage approaching. Unaware that enhanced merchants were stockpiling metal their children would need to survive the Bronze Age economy. Unaware that 2 weeks of delayed information might determine whether they ate or starved when scarcity arrived. Partnership protected their voting rights. Couldn't protect them from the information disadvantage that biology created. Couldn't prevent enhanced families from acting on knowledge that baseline families lacked the capacity to obtain. And Enkidu recognized a pattern emerging across every domain. Politics enhanced consolidating power through capability. Economics enhanced resource control through foresight. The military has enhanced dominance in combat through processing speed. Infrastructure enhanced monopolizing optimal designs. Biology enhanced living longer, reproducing differently. Resources enhanced stockpiling against scarcity they alone predicted. 6 dimensions of consolidation. All emerging from biological advantages, partnership institutions couldn't constrain, because institutions operated in the social realm while advantages operated in the biological realm. And biology didn't negotiate with institutions. The evening call to prayer echoed across Uruk, baseline humans thanking gods who were really immortals who had created the hierarchy they now struggled to manage. Thanking enhanced bloodlines for leadership that was really advantage positioned as service. Thanking the partnership for equality, which was really a compromise requiring a daily conscious choice against biological pressure toward consolidation. Enkidu returned home knowing enhanced families would begin securing copper tomorrow. Knowing baseline families would learn about the shortage 2 weeks later. Knowing those 2 weeks would determine survival for populations competing with insufficient information against populations whose biology gave them information first. Knowing the 87% consolidation probability was manifesting precisely as Nix had calculated. And knowing he'd voted to let it happen. Partnership Council Chamber, Uruk. 2 weeks later. Shearer discovered the copper purchasing pattern by accident rather than through investigation. A merchant complained that buyers were offering premium prices for bulk quantities. These prices made no economic sense unless someone expected dramatic future appreciation. 63 years old now. Baseline leader who had defeated Kronos's weighted voting proposal 5 years ago. Who had argued that efficiency without justice was tyranny. Who had fought every attempt to formalize capability-based hierarchy. And who now faced evidence that enhanced humans had been stockpiling copper for 2 weeks while baseline populations remained ignorant of the approaching crisis. He brought the evidence to the Emergency Partnership Council session, clay tablets documenting enhanced merchant purchases across 17 trade networks. Strategic acquisitions that were individually defensible but collectively obvious. Enhanced families positioned for scarcity, while baseline families planned futures assuming abundance would continue. The council chamber felt different than constitutional debates. Less philosophical. More urgent. This wasn't an abstract principle about voting systems, this was a concrete reality about survival when there wasn't enough for everyone. Ninurta represented enhanced governance positions, 67 years old by calendar, but enhanced longevity, meaning he was physically 50 at most, another century of vigorous life ahead, while Shearer felt his baseline body approaching its limits. The age disparity itself demonstrated biological inequality that economic inequality would amplify. When did enhanced leadership learn about the copper shortage? Shearer asked, voice steady despite the anger he worked to contain. 16 days ago, Ninurta replied without hesitation. My administrator from Anatolia presented extraction data showing a 5-year depletion timeline. Enhanced Merchant Council received briefing, analyzed data, developed strategic response. And partnership councils learned? Today. As scheduled. We committed to inform councils after the initial assessment. Ninurta's voice carried no defensiveness, just a matter-of-fact recitation of the timeline. Enhanced cognition processes complex data faster than baseline administration. We needed time to verify projections before presenting to broader governance. You needed time to stockpile, share or corrected. We needed time to ensure our families survive what's coming, Ninurta said quietly. Yes. Enhanced merchants began strategic copper purchasing after verifying the depletion timeline. That's prudent resource management based on information our cognition obtained first. Information you withheld from the partnership. Information we processed faster than the partnership councils could. Information we acted on using the advantages biology provides us. Information we're sharing now, before the shortage becomes obvious to baseline administrators who lack the cognitive capacity to predict it independently. The exchange revealed a gulf that partnership institutions couldn't bridge. Enhanced cognition meant enhanced foresight, which meant enhanced preparation. 2 weeks head start that biology enabled. 2 weeks that would determine survival when scarcity made resource competition survival competition. Shearer presented copper price data to the council. 7 silver shekels per talent 16 days ago. 9 shekels per talent today. A 23% price increase in 2 weeks, driven by enhanced purchasing, which baseline merchants interpreted as market fluctuation rather than strategic stockpiling. Enhanced families have been buying copper at 7 shekels and selling to each other at 9 shekels, sharer said. Artificial inflation serving enhanced interest while baseline merchants wonder why prices rose. Baseline merchants can purchase copper, too, Ninurta replied. Nothing prevents them from implementing the same strategic stockpiling enhanced families. If they lack the resources to stockpile, that reflects economic inequality that the partnership hasn't addressed. If they lack the foresight to predict a shortage, that reflects the cognitive inequality biology created. Neither is enhanced fault. But enhanced advantage compounds. You saw the crisis first because you process patterns faster. You stockpiled first because you accumulated wealth through previous advantages. You positioned for survival first because biology gives you every initial advantage that produces subsequent advantages. Yes, Ninurta acknowledged. That's biological reality. Enhanced cognition produces enhanced outcomes. Partnership protects baseline political rights. Can't prevent biology from determining resource distribution when resources become scarce. Nyx materialized at the council chamber's periphery, her quantum presence carrying mathematical certainty that made debate feel futile. She spoke without being invited, her voice cutting through political positioning to present a calculation that rendered moral arguments secondary to mathematical inevitability. Enhanced copper stockpiling accelerates scarcity timeline by approximately 2 years, she said. Projection data manifesting as visible calculations only enhanced council members could process at full speed. Enhanced purchasing drove prices up 23% in 2 weeks. Baseline populations now competing for remaining supplies at premium prices, their economic position makes them unaffordable. Copper shortage will reach crisis threshold in 3 years rather than 5 years because enhanced hoarding compressed supply faster than depletion alone would. The chamber absorbed implications. Enhanced preparation had made the crisis worse for baseline populations. Not through malice, through mathematical consequence of strategic purchasing by population with superior information and superior resources competing against population with inferior cognition and inferior wealth. We made it worse, sharer said quietly. Enhanced families made it faster, Nyx corrected. Crisis was coming regardless. Enhanced stockpiling accelerated the timeline but didn't create underlying depletion. Blaming enhanced preparation for the shortage is like blaming those who see a flood coming for the flood itself. But those who see a flood coming have a responsibility to warn those who don't, sharer replied. They do, Nyx agreed. After securing their own survival, enhanced families acted rationally given the information biology provided. Expecting them to act against biological interests for partnership principles requires extraordinary commitment to abstract equity over concrete survival. Most populations choose survival when forced to select. The debate continued as baseline council members processed the calculations that enhanced members had made days earlier. The shortage was real. The timeline was compressed. The enhanced stockpiling was strategic. The baseline populations were unprepared. The price inflation was accelerating. The partnership institutions were inadequate to prevent biology from determining outcomes when scarcity made survival advantageous. Talia arrived midway through the session, her medical background giving her perspective on biological inequality that political leaders couldn't quite articulate. She listened briefly before speaking, her voice carrying the weight of 55,000 years of watching intervention create hierarchies that intervention then couldn't solve. Partnership was designed for abundance, she said, echoing Arwad's earlier observation. When there's enough for everyone, institutions can protect equity. When there isn't enough, biology determines distribution. Enhanced cognition sees crisis first. Enhanced resources respond first. Enhanced families survive first. You can call that unfair. You can't call it unnatural. But we created enhanced cognition, sharer said. This inequality isn't natural, it's artificial. We made them superior and now claim their superiority justifies advantages. We made them superior 50 years ago, Talia replied. Today's advantages are biological reality regardless of historical origin. Enhanced cognition processes patterns faster than baseline cognition. That's not debatable. The question is whether partnership requires enhanced families to ignore the advantages biology provides when ignoring them means death. The question is whether partnership has any meaning when biology determines everything institutions try to protect against, share or countered. The chamber fell quiet. The observation was more profound than Scherer or perhaps realized. Partnership protected voting rights couldn't prevent enhanced voters from having superior information. Protected legal rights couldn't prevent enhanced litigants from processing legal complexity more quickly. Protected economic rights couldn't prevent enhanced merchants from accumulating wealth through cognitive advantages. Protected political rights couldn't prevent enhanced administrators from governing more efficiently. Protected equality on paper, while biology created hierarchy in practice. What do you want partnership councils to do? Ninurta asked finally. Copper is depleting. Tin is scarcer. The Bronze Age economy faces a crisis regardless of institutional response. Enhanced families stockpiled first because they knew first. Baseline families can stockpile now that they know. Everyone competes for an insufficient supply. Someone survives. Someone doesn't. Biology will determine who because biology determined who saw the crisis approaching. I want partnership to mean something more than baseline humans learning about catastrophe after enhanced humans positioned to survive it, Scherer said, voice carrying exhaustion that went beyond this specific crisis. I want institutions that protect baseline populations from information disadvantage they can't overcome. From the resource disadvantage that biology creates. From every advantage that compounds until baseline humans are a permanent underclass in civilization we're supposedly building together. Then you want institutions that can override biology, Kronos said, materializing beside Nix. Institutions that can prevent capability from producing outcomes. Institutions that constrain enhanced advantages to level baseline limitations. That's not partnership. That's tyranny reverse baseline inadequacy determining enhanced ceiling rather than enhanced capability determining baseline floor. It's survival, Scherer replied simply. When scarcity makes biology a survival determinant, partnership either protects baseline humans despite biology or partnership means enhanced humans survive and baseline humans starve with equal voting rights. The observation landed like a physical impact. Partnership protected political equality. Couldn't protect survival equality when biology determined who survived scarcity. The institutions worked in abundance, prevented the emergence of enhanced political tyranny, and prevented capability from becoming an official hierarchy. Failed in scarcity couldn't prevent enhanced economic survival, couldn't constrain cognitive advantage from producing survival advantage. And scarcity was approaching. Copper depleting. Tin scarcer. The Bronze Age economy is facing an existential crisis. Enhanced families are prepared. Baseline families are surprised. Partnership institutions are paralyzed between protecting equity principles and accepting biological realities. The vote on immediate response was inevitable: reserve baseline copper supplies. Restrict enhanced purchasing. Subsidize baseline stockpiling. Do something to address the information disadvantage caused by the 2-week delay. The vote failed. Enhanced council members, along with baseline members who recognized that economic intervention would worsen the crisis, voted against restricting trade. Baseline copper reserves would be depleted on the same timeline as enhanced reserves. Restricting purchases would prevent baseline families from stockpiling. Subsidies would accelerate price inflation further. No institutional solution existed that didn't make mathematics worse. Partnership passed a weak resolution. The Enhanced Merchant Council must immediately inform partnership councils of future resource crises. Strong recommendation that enhanced merchants consider baseline impact when making strategic purchases. Formation of a joint committee to study equitable distribution during scarcity. Recommendations without enforcement. Committee without authority. Resolution without mechanism. Scherer left the session knowing baseline families would face scarcity unprepared. Knowing enhanced families had positioned themselves to survive the crisis they'd predicted. Knowing a 2-week information delay would determine life and death for populations competing with insufficient knowledge against populations whose biology gave them knowledge first. Knowing partnership institutions protected voting rights, but couldn't protect survival when biology determined who saw a catastrophe approaching. Outside the council chamber, Uruk continued, enhanced districts where families stockpiled copper against a shortage they understood, baseline districts where families planned futures assuming abundance would continue. Two populations sharing one city, sharing one economy, sharing one partnership, facing one scarcity that biology had determined unequally. The partnership survived. The equity didn't. And the trigger point Nix had identified 50 years ago was arriving precisely as calculated, not through enhanced tyranny but through enhanced foresight, producing enhanced preparation, producing enhanced survival when there wasn't enough for everyone. Biology didn't negotiate with institutions. And institutions couldn't protect against biology without becoming tyrannical themselves. Prometheus's hidden workshop. Same evening as partnership council session. Prometheus worked with iron while processing council testimony that Kronos had transmitted, a detailed account of the partnership debate about copper scarcity, enhanced stockpiling, information advantages, and biological determinism. The iron glowed in the forge, white-hot and sullen. Harder than bronze. More difficult to work. Required higher temperatures, more complex techniques, more skill from the metalworker, and more patience from the teacher. But iron ores were everywhere, copper ores weren't. Common as dirt. Accessible to any population with the knowledge to smelt it. Iron could democratize metalworking. It could break enhanced monopolies on bronze trade. It could level the economic field by making metal tools available through resources that weren't concentrated in controlled deposits. Or iron could accelerate everything technology cascading beyond partnership capacity, weapons spreading faster than bronze had, conflicts multiplying as populations armed themselves with metal that wasn't scarce. 51,000 years of gift-giving. 51,000 years of watching gifts amplify inequalities they were meant to solve. He remembered teaching bronze working 6,000 years ago. Remembered believing that metal tools would help everyone. They had enhanced productivity, enabled construction, facilitated trade, and created wealth. They'd also created a hierarchy. Enhanced humans mastered bronze faster than baseline humans. Enhanced merchants controlled trade networks faster than baseline traders. Enhanced foundries produced superior metal faster than baseline smiths could learn the technique. Bronze was supposed to help everyone equally. Bronze helped enhance humans more because it allowed them to better exploit their capabilities. Now bronze was creating a crisis, copper depleting, tin scarcer, prices rising, populations competing for an insufficient supply. And enhanced humans were using information advantages to position for survival at the expense of the baseline, not through conspiracy, but through biological reality, producing economic reality. The gift he given 6,000 years ago was producing a catastrophe today. Enhanced families stockpiled copper because enhanced cognition predicted a shortage. Baseline families facing crisis because baseline cognition couldn't process depletion patterns until it was too late. Gift giving without considering distribution creates hierarchy. Prometheus hammered the iron, watching it deform under percussion that would shatter bronze. Harder. Stronger. More durable. And abundant enough that monopolization might be impossible. Unless enhanced humans dominated iron metallurgy the same way they dominated the bronze trade. Unless cognitive advantages exploited iron capabilities the same way they exploited bronze capabilities. Unless gift-giving is a recurring pattern that technically helps everyone, enhances humans in practice, and amplifies inequality while claiming to reduce it. The workshop smelled of charcoal, burning scale, and sweat. Prometheus's own sweat, because immortality didn't exempt him from physical labor. Didn't exempt from guilt about gifts that created problems they were meant to solve. Didn't exempt from compulsion to give more gifts, hoping the next one would work differently. Kronos materialized without announcement, quantum presence arriving before physical form solidified. The immortal who valued efficiency, who defended biological outcomes, who consistently argued that capability should determine hierarchy. You're considering teaching iron metallurgy, Kronos observed. No question. Statement based on watching Prometheus work with metal for weeks, calculating the probability that the gift giver would give a gift despite knowing it probably wouldn't help. I'm considering whether intervention solves problems or accelerates catastrophe, Prometheus replied. You taught bronze working 6,000 years ago, Kronos said, voice carrying correction rather than accusation. Created a trade cascade that enabled humans to now dominate. Every gift you gave amplified inequality. Now you're considering a new gift that might level the field or might trigger a technological arms race. You see the pattern? I see that gift giving without considering distribution creates hierarchy, Prometheus said. That teaching bronze to everyone didn't produce equality because enhanced cognition exploited bronze knowledge more effectively. That I created a mechanism of enhanced consolidation by providing capabilities they could optimize beyond baseline human capacity. He turned from the iron, meeting Kronos' gaze. Iron is everywhere, copper isn't. It could break the enhanced monopoly on the bronze trade. It could give baseline humans access to metal tools through resources they could control independently. Could democratize metalworking. Or could just give enhanced humans new capabilities to dominate more efficiently, Kronos completed. You don't know which outcome iron produces. But you know, baseline humans are losing economic competition. You know copper depletion will accelerate their marginalization. You know enhanced merchants control trade networks. You know partnership institutions can't prevent consolidation. And you're wondering if iron is a solution or an accelerant. Yes, Prometheus acknowledged. The iron cooled from white to orange to dull red. The transformation that made it workable, the temperature drop that made manipulation possible. Prometheus watched elemental change while considering whether teaching transformation would help or harm. You gave bronze thinking it would help everyone, Kronos continued, voice gentle rather than harsh. It did. But it helped enhance humans more because they exploited their capabilities better. You gave written language, thinking it would preserve knowledge. It did. But it preserved enhanced advantages through institutional memory that baseline humans couldn't match. You gave agricultural techniques, thinking it would feed everyone. It did. But it fed enhanced populations more efficiently because they optimized systems better. Kronos gestured toward the iron. Every gift amplified inequality. Not because gifts were bad. Enhanced cognition exploits any capability more effectively than baseline cognition. Iron won't change that. Iron just gives enhanced humans new metal to dominate more efficiently while baseline humans continue losing. Unless iron is abundant enough that domination becomes impossible, Prometheus countered. Unless democratized access to metal tools breaks monopoly advantages. Unless material equality enables economic equality, institutions can't achieve it. You're proposing a technological solution to a biological problem, Kronos said. That's optimism ignoring reality. Enhanced humans will control iron just like they control bronze. Maybe slower because iron is more abundant. But eventually, inevitably, they'll dominate iron metallurgy through the same cognitive advantages that let them dominate the bronze trade. You'll just accelerate technological development without solving the underlying hierarchy. The argument was logical. The conclusion felt wrong to Prometheus in ways he couldn't articulate because doing nothing while baseline humans suffered felt worse than doing something that probably wouldn't work. Because gift-giving was who he was, what he'd done for 51,000 years, what defined his relationship with humanity, accepting that gifts couldn't help meant accepting that intervention itself was a mistake. So I do nothing? Prometheus asked. Watch baseline humans lose economic competition? Let copper scarcity trigger a crisis that benefits enhanced humans through information advantages? Accept that every gift I give amplifies inequality while refusing to give gifts that might reduce it? You accept that biology creates advantages technology can't overcome, Kronos replied. That capability produces hierarchy regardless of resource distribution. Enhanced humans will dominate economics, whether metal is scarce or abundant, because they're better at commerce by every measurable metric. That partnership requires accepting this reality rather than pretending technology can create equality that biology prevents. Prometheus returned to the iron, heating it to temperatures that would transform ore into usable metal, watching the elemental transformation while considering whether teaching it would serve or harm. Whether the gift-giver's guilt should drive decision-making or whether rational assessment of probable outcomes should determine action. I'm waiting, Prometheus finally said. Watching whether partnership institutions can handle economic consolidation without technological intervention. If they can't, iron becomes an option. Dangerous option. Maybe a catastrophic option. But option. And if copper depletion triggers a crisis before you decide? Kronos asked. Then I decide faster. Or watch baseline humans suffer from scarcity that I could have prevented with a gift I was too cautious to give. Either way, I'm responsible for the outcome because I have knowledge others lack and must choose whether sharing knowledge serves or harms. Kronos departed, leaving Prometheus alone with iron and choice. The gift giver watching gifts creates hierarchy. A teacher recognizes that teaching amplifies inequality. Immortal with technology that could change everything or could accelerate catastrophe, trying to determine which outcome iron would produce. The iron cooled slowly. The choice remained unmade. The partnership continued to strain under the weight of problems technology might solve or exacerbate, depending on whether biological advantages exploited new capabilities faster than abundance could democratize access. 5 years until copper depletion. 3 years until the tin crisis. 2 years until the enhanced dominance of the remaining resources became obvious to baseline populations, who lacked the cognitive capacity to predict the crisis independently. Time to decide whether iron was a solution or an accelerant. Whether gift-giving served partnership or betrayed it by amplifying advantages he'd been trying to constrain. Whether doing something that probably wouldn't work was better than doing nothing while watching suffering he might have prevented. Prometheus looked at the iron bloom cooling in the forge, a crude attempt at metal that could be superior to bronze if properly developed. Metal that was common enough in ores that monopolization might be impossible. Metal that could arm baseline populations against enhanced military advantages or create an arms race that destroys the partnership entirely. The gift-giver's curse, knowing that gifts amplify inequality. Unable to stop giving gifts because gift-giving defines identity. Hoping the next gift will work differently despite evidence that patterns repeat. Wanting to help so desperately that wanting becomes compulsion despite knowing compulsion produces catastrophe. He'd given fire to humanity 51,000 years ago. Watched fire warm homes and burn enemies. Given tools that enabled building and killing. Given knowledge that enlightened and destroyed. Given bronze that traded and weaponized. Given writing that was preserved and excluded. Every gift amplifies inequality while claiming to serve equity. And now, considering giving iron, despite knowing the pattern would repeat, because he couldn't watch suffering without trying to fix it, even knowing fixing probably wouldn't work. The workshop darkened as evening became night. The forge glowed dimmer. The iron cooled from orange to black. And Prometheus remained, wrestling with the decision that felt simultaneously necessary and futile. Give iron, and it will probably further amplify inequality. Withhold iron and certainly watch baseline humans suffer. Both choices felt wrong. Both choices felt necessary. Neither choice felt adequate for the approaching crisis. But choice would come because gift givers give gifts. Because Prometheus couldn't stop being who he was, even knowing who he was, probably made things worse. The iron waited. The decision waited. The catastrophe approached. And the gift giver was prepared to give one more gift despite knowing gifts created more problems than they solved. Because that's what gift givers did. Baseline quarter, Uruk next morning. The water system failed at dawn. Kalam woke to complaints echoing through the baseline quarter, families discovering their morning water supply delivered only intermittent trickles, pressure fluctuating wildly, pipes making sounds that suggested catastrophe was approaching. 38 years old, baseline maintenance engineer, responsible for keeping Zephyrus's advanced hydraulic systems operational in neighborhoods that lacked enhanced mathematical capacity to understand them fully. He'd been predicting this failure for 3 months, had documented the problem in reports to partnership councils, and had explained that advanced systems required advanced maintenance. Had warned that infrastructure optimized for enhanced cognition would eventually break down in baseline districts because the mathematics required to maintain it exceeded baseline processing capacity. Partnership councils had acknowledged his concerns and formed a committee to study the issue. Promised additional training resources. Done nothing that actually solved the problem that mathematical complexity created hierarchy as surely as political tyranny did. Now the system was failing exactly as he'd predicted, and baseline families would face a day without adequate water because the infrastructure designed for optimal performance required optimal cognition to maintain. Kalam grabbed his tools and headed toward the distribution control center. In this hub, Zephyrus's self-regulating pressure systems managed flow across 17 nodes, accounting for elevation changes, temperature variations, seasonal demand fluctuations, maintenance accessibility, and expansion potential. The system was brilliant when functioning, incomprehensible when breaking. Required enhanced level mathematics to diagnose problems that baseline perception couldn't even articulate properly. The control center smelled of wet stone and mechanical frustration. 3 baseline engineers were already there, examining pressure gauges that showed readings none of them could interpret without enhanced cognition's pattern recognition. The numbers made sense individually: flow rates, pressure differentials, temperature variations, valve positions. The relationships between numbers required a processing capacity that baseline minds lacked. Eastern distribution node showing pressure drop of 43%, said Rahab, senior maintenance engineer, 51 years old, 30 years experience with systems that were becoming incomprehensible as Zephyrus's designs grew more sophisticated. But the western node shows a pressure increase of 37%. That shouldn't be possible with a fixed water supply unless something's redirecting flow through pathways we're not tracking. The system self-regulates based on demand patterns, Kalam explained, repeating what he'd learned from Nimlil months ago. Monitors usage across all nodes, predicts future demand, and adjusts pressure proactively to maintain optimal distribution. When eastern demand drops, the system redistributes to the western node, anticipating an evening usage spike. How do we override that? Rahab asked. We don't, Kalam replied. System operates autonomously. Manual override requires calculating a 17-variable pressure curve to prevent cascade failure across the entire network. Nimlil spent 3 hours computing that curve the last time we needed manual control. We'd need, I don't know, days? Weeks? To calculate what enhanced cognition processes in minutes. The other engineers absorbed the implications. The system that served them had been designed beyond their capacity to control. When it worked brilliantly. When it failed, they became dependent on enhanced engineers who might take hours to arrive while baseline families went without water. Kalam examined the control mechanisms: valves that required mathematical precision to adjust safely, gauges displaying relationships his mind couldn't process simultaneously, override systems protected by fail-safes that prevented baseline engineers from making adjustments that might cause worse problems than they solved. Every design choice had been optimal for performance. Every design choice had created dependency on enhanced cognition for maintenance that baseline cognition couldn't provide. Can we at least restore basic flow to the Eastern District? Asked Tamir, the youngest engineer present, 26 years old, learning that expertise in traditional systems didn't translate to understanding Zephyrus's innovations. Families need water. Even reduced pressure is better than nothing. Kalam studied the valve array, trying to identify which adjustments would increase eastern flow without causing cascade effects he couldn't predict. The problem was that he didn't know what he didn't know, couldn't calculate secondary consequences of changes to the system that processed 17 variables simultaneously. Every adjustment risked making the crisis worse. If we increase eastern flow manually, we decrease western pressure proportionally, Kalam said, thinking through relationships he could understand. But we don't know if the system will interpret that as a demand signal and redirect the flow somewhere else. We don't know if pressure changes will damage pipes designed for specific flow rates. We don't know if manual adjustment interferes with self-regulation in ways that cause failure elsewhere. So we do nothing? Rahab asked, frustration evident. So we send for Nimlil and hope she can arrive before families have gone a full day without water, Kalam replied, hating the admission of inadequacy but recognizing reality. We maintain systems we understand. This one exceeds our capacity. The admission felt like defeat. Baseline engineers with decades of experience acknowledged they couldn't maintain infrastructure in their own neighborhoods. Trained professionals admitting they needed enhanced assistance for systems that served baseline populations. Competent workers facing a technological hierarchy that wasn't malicious but was absolute enhanced cognition-built infrastructure, baseline cognition couldn't fix. Rahab sent a messenger to the enhanced quarter requesting Nimlil's assistance. Normal process. Standard protocol. Recognition that some problems exceeded baseline capacity and required enhanced intervention. The kind of dependency partnership institutions couldn't prevent because the dependency emerged from mathematics rather than politics. How long until she arrives? Tamir asked. Depends on her schedule, Kalam replied. Enhanced engineers serve multiple districts. If the enhanced quarter has a priority issue, the baseline quarter waits. That's triage based on resource scarcity. One enhanced engineer serving 7 baseline districts plus enhanced quarter means someone always waits. Why don't we train more baseline engineers in enhanced level mathematics? Tamir asked, young enough to think education could solve biological limitations. We try, Kalam said gently. Athena teaches advanced mathematics to baseline students. Some of us can eventually understand the theory. But processing 17 variables simultaneously, calculating pressure curves in real time, and recognizing patterns across complex systems require cognitive speed that baseline neurology doesn't provide. Education can teach knowledge. Can't accelerate processing speed that biology determines. The engineers settled into waiting, which characterized the baseline relationship with advanced infrastructure. Watching systems they couldn't fully understand, experiencing failures they couldn't adequately diagnose, hoping enhanced assistance would arrive before the crisis became a catastrophe. Kalam thought about the copper shortage partnership councils had learned about yesterday. Thought about enhanced family stockpiling resources that baseline families couldn't afford because enhanced cognition predicted crisis, baseline cognition missed. Thought about pattern repeating across every domain where biology created advantages institutions couldn't constrain. Infrastructure designed for enhanced cognition. Trade networks optimized by enhanced calculation. Military tactics have been developed through enhanced processing. Resource predictions enabled by enhanced foresight. Lifespan advantages through enhanced cellular repair. Economic dominance through enhanced decision-making. 6 dimensions of consolidation all emerging from biological advantages that created hierarchy despite institutional attempts to prevent it. And now, baseline engineers acknowledged they couldn't maintain water systems in their own neighborhoods without enhanced assistance. Partnership protected voting rights. Couldn't protect competence when the infrastructure required a cognition baseline that humans lacked. Ninlil arrived 2 hours later, early by baseline standards, delayed by enhanced standards. She assessed the system with speed that made baseline engineers' struggles feel futile. Enhanced cognitive processing, simultaneously processing 17 variables, recognizing patterns, baseline perception missed, calculating corrections, and baseline mathematics couldn't approximate. Pressure sensor in eastern node failing, she diagnosed within minutes. System interpreted bad data as a demand drop, redistributed flow accordingly. Manual override requires recalibrating 6 connected nodes to prevent cascade failure. Give me 40 minutes. 40 minutes for work that would take baseline engineers days to calculate, if they could calculate it at all. Ninlil worked with casual efficiency that demonstrated a capability gap no amount of training could bridge. Enhanced cognition performing maintenance at speed, baseline minds couldn't match because biology determined processing capacity, education couldn't override. She finished the repairs with time to spare, documented the work with clarity that baseline engineers appreciated but couldn't have produced, and provided recommendations for monitoring sensor degradation that required mathematics Kalam would need help interpreting. Thank you, Kalam said, meaning it despite resenting the dependency it represented. The system needs redesign, Ninlil replied, her voice carrying acknowledgement rather than accusation. Zephyrus was built for optimal performance. Didn't consider maintenance capacity. I've been telling him baseline districts need simpler infrastructure, less efficient but more maintainable. He's resistant to accepting that optimal design isn't appropriate design when users can't maintain what builders create. Will he redesign? Kalam asked. Ninlil's expression suggested doubt. He built for universal access in Chapter 9. Started valuing participation over performance. But a comprehensive redesign requires acknowledging that his advanced systems create hierarchy through maintenance dependency. That's a difficult admission for an architect who believed he was helping. She departed, leaving baseline engineers with a functioning water system they couldn't have fixed independently. Leaving Kalam, processing implications of infrastructure inequality that compounded resource inequality, economic inequality, military inequality, and biological inequality. Leaving baseline quarter dependent on enhanced assistance for systems serving baseline populations because optimal design required optimal cognition that biology denied them. The water flowed again. The families received the supplies they needed. The crisis was averted. And the hierarchy was reinforced through infrastructure that required enhanced intervention to maintain, through technology that served baseline populations while creating dependence on enhanced expertise, and through design choices that enabled functionality but prevented independence. Partnership protected equal access to water. Couldn't protect equal capacity to maintain water systems when maintenance required cognition. Biology hadn't been distributed equally. Kalam returned to his rounds, knowing the subsequent failure would require enhanced assistance again. Knowing baseline engineers would remain dependent on enhanced cognition for infrastructure maintenance regardless of training or effort. Knowing the optimal design created a hierarchy that institutions couldn't prevent because hierarchy emerged from mathematics rather than malice. The water sang again through pipes that baseline engineers couldn't fully understand, flowing to families who didn't recognize that the infrastructure itself was a consolidation mechanism. And the partnership continued, protecting political equality while accepting technological hierarchy that biology had determined through cognitive advantages that created dependencies institutions couldn't eliminate. Immortal Council, hidden location. 3 days after infrastructure failure. The Immortal Council gathered in quantum space, outside normal geography, 9 consciousnesses manifesting across dimensions that baseline humans couldn't perceive and enhanced humans barely suspected. Prometheus had called the emergency session, knowing what the response would be. Still, unable to proceed without at least attempting to obtain official permission for the action, he would likely proceed regardless. Iron metallurgy. The gift that could democratize access to metal or accelerate catastrophe beyond partnership capacity to manage. The choice that would determine whether technology could solve problems biology created or whether gift-giving would repeat the pattern Prometheus couldn't seem to break. The council space manifested as each immortal preferred, Kronos organizing geometric perfection, Nyx calculating probabilistic branches, Talia examining biological consequences, Korath assessing tactical implications, Zephyrus visualizing structural systems, Athena processing educational frameworks, and Astra documenting moral dimensions. Different perspectives converging on a single question: should Prometheus teach iron metallurgy to baseline humans now, before partnership institutions were ready to manage the technological cascade? I propose teaching iron smelting to baseline populations immediately, Prometheus began, his avatar manifesting with an iron bloom held like an offering. Copper shortage threatens baseline survival. Tin scarcity constrains bronze production. Iron ores are abundant. Teaching iron metallurgy breaks enhanced monopoly on metal tools, democratizes resource access, and provides baseline populations with economic independence. You propose a technological solution to a biological problem, Kronos replied, his voice carrying precise analysis that Prometheus had already heard but needed counsel to consider. Enhanced humans will dominate iron metallurgy through cognitive advantages that let them dominate the bronze trade. Iron doesn't solve inequality. Iron gives enhanced humans new capabilities to exploit more efficiently. Iron is everywhere, copper isn't, Prometheus countered. Abundance prevents monopolization. Enhanced cognition provides advantages, but can't monopolize resources that exist in every region. Enhanced cognition monopolizes knowledge, Nyx observed, probability matrices branching across quantum dimensions. Iron requires higher temperatures than bronze. More complex smelting. Different alloying. Carbon content management. Baseline populations learning iron metallurgy will take decades to achieve proficiency, whereas enhanced metallurgists develop in years. You're proposing a head start that biology will eliminate through differential learning speed. Decades of baseline proficiency are better than centuries of bronze dependency, Prometheus argued. Giving baseline humans iron now provides 30 years of economic competition before enhanced humans perfect techniques. 30 years of baseline independence before cognitive advantages produce dominance. Better than waiting while baseline populations starve during a copper shortage. Talia spoke, her medical perspective grounding moral debate in biological reality. The question isn't whether enhanced humans will eventually dominate iron. The question is whether baseline humans deserve the opportunity to compete, regardless of the eventual outcome. Do we deny baseline populations technology because we predict they'll lose? Or do we provide capability and let biology determine results? We provide capability, Korath interjected, his warrior perspective seeing strategic implications others considered secondary. And watch baseline populations arm themselves with weapons superior to bronze. Watch the military balance shift unpredictably. Watch iron weapons spreading faster than bronze because iron is abundant. You're not just democratizing tools, you're accelerating the arms race. Bronze already armed populations, Prometheus replied. Iron just provides better weapons from more accessible resources. Military implications exist regardless of whether I teach iron now or humans discover it independently later. Later gives partnership time to prepare, Korath countered. Now gives populations weapons before institutions develop frameworks to manage military cascade. You're proposing to arm baseline humans against enhanced military superiority before partnership establishes protocols preventing iron weapons from destroying what we built. The debate continued as immortals processed implications from perspectives 50,000 years of observation had cultivated. Each viewpoint is valid. Each concern is legitimate. Each argument reveals different facets of the question that have no obviously correct answer. Zephyrus contributed an infrastructure perspective that he had learned from his Chapter 9 recognition. I built systems that baseline populations couldn't maintain. Created dependency through optimal design and learned that appropriate technology matters more than advanced technology. Iron might be appropriate for baseline populations if we teach comprehensively, not just smelting but maintenance, not just production but sustainability. The question is whether Prometheus commits to comprehensive teaching or gives a gift without a support system. I'll teach comprehensively, Prometheus promised. Not just iron smelting but forging techniques, carbon management, and tool design. Everything baseline populations need to compete economically. And military applications? Korath pressed. Will you teach weapon forging? Armor production? Will you give comprehensive knowledge that includes converting iron into enhanced killing capacity? Prometheus hesitated. The question revealed a dilemma he'd been avoiding. Teaching iron meant teaching weapons. Teaching weapons meant accelerating military competition. Teaching military competition meant that enhanced warriors use superior iron weapons against baseline populations who couldn't match their enhanced combat processing. I'll teach defensive applications first, Prometheus said finally. Tools before weapons. Economic applications before military. Give baseline populations means to compete commercially while delaying military cascade. You can't control a knowledge cascade, Nix observed, probability calculations manifesting as a warning. Teaching iron smelting means someone learns weapon forging within 5 years. Teaching weapon forging means someone develops advanced tactics within 10 years. Teaching anything means enhanced cognition optimizes it faster than baseline populations implement it. Your comprehensive teaching accelerates the timeline without changing the outcome. The mathematics were inexorable. The biology was deterministic. The outcome was predictable. And Prometheus was proposing to teach iron anyway because watching baseline populations suffer felt worse than accepting gifts wouldn't solve the problems biology created. Vote on proposal, Kronos said, moving toward a decision with efficiency he valued above prolonged debate. Prometheus requests permission to teach iron metallurgy to baseline populations immediately, with focus on economic applications before military. Those in favor? Hands manifested in quantum space. Astor supports this because knowledge shouldn't be withheld. Talia supports because baseline populations deserve an opportunity, despite the predicted outcome. Athena supports this because education was always better than ignorance. 3 in favor. Those opposed? Kronos opposes because technology wouldn't solve biological problems. Korath opposes because the military cascade exceeded partnership readiness. Nix opposes because probability analysis showed a 73% chance of armed conflict within 50 years. Zephyrus abstained, recognizing that he couldn't judge after his own infrastructure mistakes. 3 opposed. 1 abstention. I'm opposed as well, Sophia said quietly, her educational perspective seeing a pattern Prometheus refused to acknowledge. Not because baseline populations don't deserve knowledge. Because you're giving a gift without accepting that gift-giving amplifies inequality. Because you're repeating the pattern, hoping for a different outcome. Because you can't stop being a gift giver even knowing gift giving doesn't work. 4 opposed. 3 in favor. 1 abstention. Proposal fails, Kronos announced. Prometheus will not teach iron metallurgy at this time. Council recommends waiting until partnership institutions develop frameworks for managing technological cascade before introducing metals that could accelerate military competition beyond governance capacity. The decision was made. The wisdom was clear. The path was rational. And Prometheus knew he would ignore it. Because gift givers give gifts. Watching suffering while possessing a solution felt worse than making suffering worse by providing an inadequate solution. Because 51,000 years of gift-giving had created an identity he couldn't abandon, even knowing it probably made things worse. I accept the council decision, Prometheus said, words technically accurate if intentions were deceptive. The council dispersed, each immortal returning to observation posts, intervention projects, and documentation work, leaving Prometheus alone with Iron Bloom and the choice he'd already made before calling the council to request permission he didn't actually need. He would teach Iron. Soon. Secretly. To baseline a human who could learn. Would give gifts despite council wisdom because gift-giving defined who he was more than council membership constrained what he did. Would repeat the pattern, knowing it wouldn't work because the pattern was identity. And would accept responsibility for consequences while knowing accepting responsibility didn't prevent consequences from happening. The gift-giver's curse continued. Remote border region. 2 weeks later, nighttime. Prometheus met Valkyne in darkness that served secrecy, both needed, immortal teaching iron metallurgy against council decision, baseline human learning technology that could change everything or doom everything, depending on biological variables neither could control. The location was isolated deliberately. The border region between territories where neither the Mesopotamian nor the Anatolian authorities maintained a strong presence. Where baseline human metalworkers could disappear for weeks without arousing suspicion. Where an immortal could teach without enhanced administrators noticing the quantum disturbance that the quantum presence created. Valkyne arrived exactly when specified. 32 years old. Baseline human. 4th-generation metalworker whose family specialized in bronze casting but who possessed talent for metallurgy that transcended typical baseline capacity. Not enhanced. Prometheus had a verified genetic profile. Just exceptional within baseline limitations. Smart enough to learn iron. Skilled enough to teach others. Capable enough to spread knowledge that could democratize metal tools or accelerate catastrophe. Perfect student for a gift giver who couldn't stop giving gifts despite knowing gifts created problems. You said you'd teach me something bronze masters don't know, Valkyne said, voice carrying curiosity that overrode caution. Something that could change metalworking forever. Iron, Prometheus replied simply, showing the bloom he'd prepared. Harder than bronze. Stronger than bronze. Forged from ores common as dirt rather than concentrated in controlled deposits. Metal that could break the enhanced monopoly on bronze trade if baseline populations learned to work it. Valkyne took the iron bloom, feeling its weight, examining its structure by firelight. Enhanced cognition would have processed metallurgical properties instantly. Baseline cognition required sensory examination, comparison to known metals, and experiential learning that took time but produced understanding. It's heavier than bronze, Valkyne observed. Darker. Rougher texture. How did you make it? Higher temperatures than bronze requires, Prometheus explained, beginning teaching that would occupy weeks. Iron ores need heat that turns copper molten to slag. Requires better furnaces, stronger bellows, and different flux. But the process is teachable. The knowledge is transferable. And the ores are everywhere. He showed iron ores magnetite, hematite, and common stones that existed in regions lacking copper deposits. Showed how to build a furnace that reached temperatures bronze metallurgy didn't require. Showed how to process ore into a bloom that could be forged into tools superior to bronze. Teaching carefully. Comprehensively. Not just technique but principles. Not just procedure but understanding. Giving Valkyne the foundation to teach others rather than just replicate what he'd learned. This was Zephyrus's lesson applied to metallurgy. Appropriate teaching for baseline cognition. Comprehensive knowledge that enabled independence rather than created dependency. Gift-giving that attempted to avoid previous mistakes, even while repeating the pattern that made mistakes inevitable. Why teach me? Valkyne asked a question that went beyond technical curiosity to moral complexity. Bronze masters guard their techniques. You're giving me knowledge that could transform metalworking. Why? Prometheus considered lying. Considered a noble explanation about advancing human development. Considered a strategic justification for baseline populations deserving economic competition, and considered any answer except the truth. Gave the truth anyway because the student deserved honesty, even if the teacher didn't deserve absolution. Because I taught bronze working 6,000 years ago and watched it create hierarchy I didn't intend, Prometheus said quietly. Because enhanced humans dominated the bronze trade through cognitive advantages that let them exploit knowledge faster than baseline humans could learn it. Because I'm trying to fix that inequality by giving baseline populations metal that enhances cognition, which can't be monopolized through scarcity. Because I don't know if it will work, but I can't watch baseline populations starve during a copper shortage without trying something, even if something probably won't solve the problems biology created. Tuvokeen absorbed a confession that revealed a mortal uncertainty. You think iron might not help us? I think iron might help you temporarily before enhanced cognition dominates iron metallurgy the way it dominates bronze trade, Prometheus replied honestly. I think abundance of iron ores prevents monopolization, but doesn't prevent cognitive advantages from producing superior technique. I think you'll have decades of economic competition before biology creates hierarchy again. And I think decades of baseline independence is worth teaching even if the eventual outcome is predictable. So you're giving me a head start, enhanced humans will eventually overcome? Yes, Prometheus acknowledged. That's exactly what I'm doing. Because a head start means your children eat during the copper shortage. Because a temporary advantage is better than a permanent disadvantage. Because doing something that probably won't work is better than doing nothing while watching suffering I might have prevented. The honesty hung between them, gift giver admitting limitations, student recognizing the gift came with no guarantee of success, both choosing to proceed anyway because alternatives felt worse than uncertainty. Teach me everything, Tuvokeen said. If enhanced humans will eventually dominate iron anyway, baseline populations need every advantage you can provide during the time we have. Teach me iron so thoroughly that when enhanced metallurgists perfect technique, baseline smiths have decades of practice making us competitive despite cognitive disadvantages. Prometheus taught through the night and through subsequent nights across 3 weeks of intensive instruction. Taught iron smelting with precision that would take a baseline metallurgist years to develop independently. Taught forging techniques that worked with iron's properties rather than fought against them, and taught carbon management that determined whether iron became brittle or flexible. Taught everything except military applications those he withheld deliberately, hoping to delay weapons cascade, even knowing delay was probably futile. He watched Tuvokeen learn quickly, despite baseline limitations. Watched baseline cognition processing complex metallurgy through sensory experience and patient repetition. Watched talent expressing itself through a medium that could transform economic competition if knowledge spread faster than enhanced cognition perfected the technique. Watched a gift being given despite the council prohibition, despite knowing the pattern would repeat, despite accepting the consequences that teaching would produce. The teaching was completed as the moon cycled through phases that marked time for humans who lacked immortal patience. Tuvokeen had mastered fundamentals, not expert but competent, not perfect but capable, not matching enhanced speed but possessing knowledge he could teach others. What now? Tuvokeen asked, holding an iron blade he'd forged himself, crude by enhanced standards, miraculous by baseline standards, proof that teaching had succeeded even if success would produce unpredictable consequences. Now you teach others, Prometheus said. Carefully. Comprehensively. Baseline metallurgists who can learn. In regions where iron ores are abundant, and copper is scarce. Build baseline expertise before enhanced cognition recognizes iron's advantages. Give your people decades of a head start before biology produces the outcome we both know is coming. And when enhanced metallurgists perfect iron working, then baseline smiths compete with decades of experience against enhanced novices. Won't equalize biology. It might equalize economics temporarily. That's the best I can offer. Tuvokeen nodded, accepting limitations honestly acknowledged. Thank you. For knowledge. For honesty. For trying even knowing it might not work. Thank you for learning, Prometheus replied. For taking a gift despite uncertainty. To spread the knowledge I'm giving you. For doing what you can with what you have, even knowing biology determines the ceiling you can't overcome. They parted as dawn approached, baseline human carrying knowledge that could change civilization, immortal watching gift being given despite knowing gifts created problems they were meant to solve. Prometheus remained after Dvalkine departed, watching sunrise illuminate the border region where teaching had occurred. Feeling guilty for violating the council decision. Feeling relieved to have helped baseline populations compete. Feeling dread for the consequences teaching would produce. Feeling all emotions simultaneously because the gift-giver's curse meant never feeling certainty about choices that felt simultaneously necessary and futile. The iron waited in the forge. The knowledge was stored in the student. The consequences that awaited couldn't be predicted with certainty, but that pattern suggested it would repeat previous failures. And Prometheus accepted responsibility, knowing acceptance didn't prevent catastrophe, knowing gifts amplified inequality, knowing gift-giving defined identity, he couldn't abandon even when abandoning it was wise. The teaching was done. The cascade would begin. The pattern would repeat. And the gift-giver would watch gifts create a hierarchy while hoping this time would be different, despite evidence suggesting nothing ever changed except the scale of the consequences his interventions produced. Order Safe House, Anatolia. 2 days after learning iron metallurgy. Before dawn. Dvalkine returned to the hidden chamber carrying knowledge that would change everything, knowledge that Prometheus had taught despite council prohibition, innovation that would cascade across centuries, producing technologies immortals couldn't predict. Humans would weaponize in ways teachers couldn't prevent. Iron metallurgy. Higher temperatures than bronze are required. Different techniques from copper are demanded, a metal that transformed warfare, agriculture, construction, everything that civilization built upon. And he was an order member carrying the Covenant's central dilemma: serve immortal secrecy by suppressing teaching, or serve human development by spreading innovation that would accelerate the revelation timeline beyond anyone's control. He activated the quantum communication network technology his father had taught him to use, an inheritance from biblical namesake Dvalkine, who'd supposedly invented metalworking but who'd actually been Order founder documenting immortal technological instruction. Encoded message to Methuselah transmitted through secured channels. Prometheus taught me iron despite the prohibition, technology cascade beginning. Recommend full order mobilization to manage the spread. Can't suppress too many Smiths learning simultaneously across regions. Can only document and prepare for consequences that teaching produces. Response came within minutes. Methuselah's encoded reply pulsing through the network with urgency that quantum compression couldn't hide. Document everything: spread patterns, adoption rates, social responses, weaponization timeline. Technology cascades are why order exists, to prepare both species for the consequences of innovations that immortals create and humans weaponize. Your father chose the name well. Dvalkine, the first metalworker, according to texts. Now you carry forward his legacy while serving a covenant that prepares for the truth about where metalworking really originated. Dvalkine studied the response and its implications for cognitive processing. His biblical namesake hadn't invented metalworking, hadn't documented immortal instruction about it, hadn't preserved truth in text that became mythology, hadn't served purposes that his father had formalized into an organization now managing the preparation of revelation. He was living mythology. Was becoming the documentation he'd been named after. Was serving the covenant by spreading innovation while documenting innovation's spread, teaching humans while preserving evidence that teaching came from an immortal source rather than human discovery. The irony felt heavy. Felt appropriate. Felt like destiny. His father had predicted it when choosing the name, connecting biblical documentation to current preservation. He began encoding detailed records, Prometheus's teaching method, iron smelting temperatures, crucible construction techniques, everything that future historians would need to understand how the Iron Age began, not through independent human innovation but through an immortal gift that immortals had then attempted to hide, despite the gift's visibility making hiding increasingly impossible. Teaching Diary, Day 1. Prometheus arrived at the forge before dawn. Showed crucible modifications enabling temperatures that bronze work never required. Explained or selection, hematite rather than malachite, reduction rather than direct smelting. Demonstrated below are improvements that create sustained heat, which copper processing couldn't achieve. His teaching wasn't theoretical. Was practical. It was designed for immediate application and inevitable spread. He knew what he was doing wasn't accidental revelation of secrets but deliberate catalyzing of a cascade that the Council's prohibition had attempted to prevent. Why? Asked him directly. Why teach despite prohibition? Why accelerate the revelation timeline? Why enable technology cascade that partnership institutions aren't prepared to manage? His answer: because copper scarcity makes crisis inevitable. Because a partnership needs alternatives before scarcity produces conflict. Because controlled teaching is better than desperate rediscovery when resource wars begin. Because. He paused, ancient eyes showing burden of 50,000 years making similar choices, ... because refusing to teach doesn't prevent discovery, just delays it until delay produces worse outcomes than early teaching produces. He left before dawn fully arrived, an immortal who'd given fire to humanity millennia earlier, now giving iron, each gift enabling advancement and warfare simultaneously, each teaching serving progress and danger equally, each intervention helping and harming in proportions no one could predict, but everyone would experience. I'll teach what he taught me. It will spread iron metallurgy across 3 continents. We'll document its proliferation. We'll preserve records showing innovation came through guided development rather than independent discovery. We'll serve the covenant by managing the cascade initiated by the teaching. The order witnesses everything. Even especially the interventions that make revelation inevitable. He encoded the teaching diary in preservation formats, each entry serving dual purposes: immediate instruction for Smith's learning techniques and long-term documentation for historians' understanding of origins. Spread pattern: Week 1. Taught 3 Smiths in Anatolia. They'll teach others. Exponential progression begins. Within months, iron working will reach Mesopotamia. Within years, Egypt and the Indus Valley. Within decades, Europe and Eastern territories. Can't suppress. Order policy prohibits interference with human development except where intervention is necessary to prevent a greater catastrophe. Teaching suppression would prevent metallurgical advancement, possibly preventing alternatives to copper scarcity, potentially producing resource wars that iron availability might ease. So we document instead. Record who learns when, how innovation spreads, what purposes iron serves, agricultural tools first, then weapons inevitably, construction eventually, everything that metal enables. Prometheus was right about the cascade being inevitable. I was probably right about controlled teaching being preferable to desperate rediscovery. Whether being right justifies teaching despite prohibition. That's a question for revelation judgment rather than current determination. Order serves documentation. Documents teaching. Documents spread. Documents consequences that neither the teacher nor the students can predict, but everyone will experience. Technology doesn't negotiate with social readiness. Innovation doesn't wait for institutional preparation. The Iron Age begins because the immortals chose teaching over prohibition. After all, the Smiths chose to spread over to suppress. After all, humans need alternatives that copper scarcity makes necessary, regardless of the partnership's preparation level. He transmitted updates to Methuselah, received coordination instructions from the order leader whose father had built a network specifically for managing moments exactly like this, when immortal intervention produced a cascade that documentation could manage but couldn't prevent. Regional coordination, Week 2. Methuselah mobilizing order across regions. Damon is documenting in Mesopotamia. Awan is monitoring Egypt. Inara is tracking the Indus Valley. 12 primary members coordinating, 18 support personnel assisting. Whole Covenant mobilization managing a technology cascade that one Immortal's teaching initiated and one Smith's documentation now preserves. This is why order exists. Preventing innovation is impossible and undesirable. To document innovation's origins, manage the timing of revelation, and prepare both species for honesty about guided development rather than independent discovery. We're living the cascade Father Enoch predicted and experiencing the acceleration he'd calculated. Managing the revelation preparation, he built an organization to facilitate. The Iron Age begins, order documents. Revelation approaches. And a metalworker named Tevalcain, after a biblical figure who documented immortal teaching millennia earlier, serves the covenant by teaching what the immortal taught while preserving evidence that the teaching came from a source humans don't yet acknowledge, but eventually will have to confront honestly. He continued encoding, continued teaching. Continued serving dual purposes that the covenant demanded, spread innovation that humanity needed while documenting innovation's origins for revelation that humanity wasn't ready for but would eventually require. The order witnessed everything. Even the interventions that made revelation inevitable while attempting to manage revelation's emergence. Even the teachings that accelerated timelines while trying to shape acceleration toward survivable rather than catastrophic outcomes. Even the cascades that no one could prevent, but someone needed to document for the future, so that those who would judge whether the documentation justified everything required would do so. Tuvokeen taught iron metallurgy. Preserved evidence of immortal teaching. Served the covenant by spreading innovation while managing spread through documentation that would survive geological time and inform species attempting to understand their own development centuries hence. The Iron Age had begun. The order documented the beginning. Revelation approached through every innovation, every teaching, every moment when immortals gave knowledge that humans weaponized in ways no one predicted, but everyone experienced. Technology didn't negotiate with readiness. Innovation didn't wait for preparation. The cascade had started. Documentation continued. Revelation approached. And an order member named after a biblical metalworker served the covenant by becoming mythology while documenting reality beneath it for a future that would need understanding, which the current generation couldn't provide because it was living through a transformation that only a historical perspective could properly comprehend. Gilgamesh's chamber, Uruk. Same night as iron teaching. Gilgamesh lay dying while calculating how comprehensive failure would be. 172 years old. Enhanced longevity, extending lifespan to more than double the baseline human maximum, but cellular repair still fails nonetheless. Organs deteriorate despite enhancement. The body recognizes that even superior biology eventually succumb to entropy. Maybe 2 years remaining. Maybe less. Enough time to watch consolidation accelerate. Not enough time to prevent it. He reviewed patterns mentally, enhanced cognition processing implications, even as physical form failed. 6 dimensions of crisis converging toward catastrophe, partnership institutions couldn't prevent because they operated in the social realm, while biology operated in the cellular realm, determining outcomes regardless of governance. Political consolidation, enhanced humans' accumulation of power through capability advantages institutions couldn't constrain without becoming tyrannical. Weighted voting was defeated, but the principle underlying it, that capability should determine authority, won out through practical reality rather than the constitutional framework. Economic consolidation, enhanced merchants controlling 73% of the bronze trade through cognitive advantages that produced information advantages that produced resource advantages. The copper shortage revealed that enhanced foresight meant enhanced survival, while baseline populations learned about the crisis only after enhanced families secured resources. Military consolidation, Lugal's massacre demonstrates 47 baseline deaths versus 3 enhanced losses. Processing speed determined combat outcomes, partnerships couldn't prevent, when milliseconds determined survival. Chorus training principles are becoming weapons in the hands of the superior baseline opposition. Infrastructure consolidation, Zephyrus's optimal designs created dependency where baseline engineers couldn't maintain systems serving baseline populations. Water failure requires enhanced intervention. Architecture that enables enhanced functionality while constraining baseline independence. Biological consolidation, Talia's research shows that enhanced humans live 187 years, compared to baseline 59 years. Hybrid fertility is declining toward speciation. Cellular differences producing lifespan inequality institutions couldn't fix because biology didn't negotiate with ethics. Resource consolidation, copper shortage demonstrates that scarcity made biological advantages survival advantages. Enhanced cognition, predicting a crisis, is missed until it is too late. Information advantage becomes economic advantage, and becomes a survival advantage when there isn't enough for everyone. 6 domains. 6 tests. 6 revelations of the same truth. Partnership requires choosing justice over capability daily. In politics. In economics. In the military. In infrastructure. In biology. In resources. Across every dimension of civilization, where biological advantage could determine hierarchy. Not once. Not in one domain. Continuously. Comprehensively. against the biological pressure that made hierarchy natural and equity artificial. And this generation wasn't choosing partnership. They were choosing capability. Logically. Inevitably. Catastrophically. Gilgamesh had built institutions protecting baseline political rights, constitutional frameworks preventing weighted voting, electoral systems ensuring baseline representation, legal protections against enhanced tyranny, all the political machinery necessary to prevent capability from becoming an official hierarchy. And biology had produced hierarchy anyway, through markets that rewarded cognitive advantages. In the military, where processing speed determined survival, through infrastructure requiring enhanced maintenance, through the lifespan, providing an enhanced experience, through resources requiring enhanced foresight. Partnership survived politically, failed practically, protected voting rights while baseline populations lost economic competition, military conflicts, infrastructure independence, biological equality, and access to resources. The institutions worked. The equity didn't. Biology determined outcomes institutions couldn't prevent without becoming tyrannical themselves. He thought about Enkidu, a grandson carrying entitlement that experience hadn't yet corrected, capability without wisdom, power without obligation. Enkidu would lead after Gilgamesh died. Would face the same six-domain crisis. Would choose capability over justice because capability felt natural and justice felt artificial when biology provided advantages. It would accelerate the consolidation that Gilgamesh had spent 50 years trying to prevent. Not through malice. Through impeccable logic and a catastrophic conclusion. Talia visited occasionally, a healer who had created enhanced bloodlines and spent 50 years trying to fix what she'd broken. She entered now, quantum presence announcing itself before physical form solidified, sat beside the dying king who had fought consolidation longer than any enhanced human would have right to expect. The copper crisis manifested exactly as you predicted, Talia said quietly. Enhanced families stockpiled resources. Baseline families learned too late. Partnership institutions couldn't prevent biology from determining distribution. And infrastructure failure? Gilgamesh asked, voice weaker than enhanced vitality should allow. Baseline engineers couldn't maintain Zephyrus's systems. Required enhanced intervention. Another domain where capability determines outcomes despite institutional attempts at equity. And Prometheus? Talia hesitated. Teaching iron metallurgy. Secretly. Against the council decision. To baseline humans who might spread knowledge that democratizes access to metal or accelerates the arms race beyond partnership capacity to manage. Another gift that probably won't solve problems biology created. Gilgamesh absorbed the information without surprise. Prometheus would give gifts. Enkidu would consolidate power. Enhanced cognition would determine outcomes. Biology would produce hierarchy. The pattern would continue after he died because the pattern reflected reality. Institutions couldn't override without tyranny. Will the partnership survive? Gilgamesh asked the question that mattered more than his personal survival. Talia considered carefully. Partnership will survive politically. Constitutional protections will prevent weighted voting. Electoral systems will maintain baseline representation. Legal frameworks will prevent enhanced tyranny. All the institutions you built will continue functioning. But baseline populations will lose every domain except political. Economics to enhance merchants. Military to enhance warriors. Infrastructure to enhance engineers. Resources to enhance foresight. Longevity to enhance biology. They'll have voting rights in civilization that biology determines, despite votes. So I built institutions that protect form while substance erodes? Gilgamesh asked the question rhetorically because the answer was obvious. You built institutions that prevent worst outcomes, Talia corrected gently. Without constitutional protections, enhanced populations would formalize hierarchy through weighted voting, segregated districts, and legal inequality. With protections, they consolidate informally through biological advantages institutions can't constrain without tyranny. That's not failure, that's limiting catastrophe to partial rather than comprehensive. Partial catastrophe is still catastrophe, Gilgamesh observed. Yes, Talia acknowledged. But it's a catastrophe where baseline populations maintain dignity, political voice, and legal protection. Where they can compete despite losing. Where partnership requires choosing justice daily rather than accepting that justice is impossible. That's worth preserving even when imperfect. Gilgamesh looked toward the window, where Uruk continued below, enhanced districts where families controlled resources, and baseline districts where families maintained political representation despite economic marginalization. Partnership surviving. Equity failing. Biology determines outcomes that institutions try to prevent. What happens when I die? He asked, a question carrying weight beyond personal mortality. Enkidu leads, Talia replied. Faces the same six-domain crisis. Chooses capability or justice. Probably chooses capability because biology makes it logical. Consolidation accelerates. Partnership institutions strain. Trigger point approaching that Nix calculated 50 years ago. Can anything prevent it? Conscious choice, Talia said simply. Each generation chooses justice over capability, despite biology making capability easier. Each domain prioritizes equity over optimization, even though optimization yields better outcomes. Daily decision to build institutions that constrain advantages rather than let advantages determine everything. Continuous commitment to partnership despite partnership being harder than hierarchy. Will they choose that? Gilgamesh asked, meaning enhanced humans generally and Enkidu specifically. I don't know, Talia admitted. You chose it. Fought for it 50 years. Built institutions protecting it. Dying watching it strain. Whether the next generation maintains the commitment you demonstrated. That's a choice they have to make themselves. She departed, leaving Gilgamesh alone with mortality approaching and a legacy uncertain. He'd spent 172 years building a partnership between populations that biology had made unequal, 50 years since the revelation establishing constitutional frameworks. Decades of fighting consolidation made that capability logical and biology inevitable. And dying while watching the six-domain crisis converge, he couldn't prevent. Political consolidation defeated weighted voting but couldn't prevent capability from determining authority in practice. Economic consolidation couldn't prevent enhanced cognition from controlling trade through information advantages. Military consolidation couldn't prevent processing speed from determining combat outcomes. Infrastructure consolidation couldn't prevent optimal design from creating dependencies. Biological consolidation couldn't prevent lifespan inequality from producing experience advantages. Resource consolidation couldn't prevent enhanced foresight from securing survival through scarcity. Six domains proving the same truth: biology creates advantages institutions can't constrain without tyranny. Partnership protects against formal hierarchy. Can't prevent the informal hierarchy that capability produces through every available pathway. The founder would die watching the partnership strain under problems he'd predicted but couldn't solve. Would leave institutions insufficient to guarantee their own survival. Would trust that future generations would choose justice despite biology making capability easier. Hope wasn't certainty. But hope was what the founders had to offer: institutions, principles, and faith that humans would maintain partnership despite it being more complicated than hierarchy. Outside his window, Uruk continued. Enhanced districts gleaming with infrastructure baseline districts couldn't maintain. Enhanced families stockpiling copper against shortage baseline families learned about too late. Enhanced merchants controlling trade networks baseline traders couldn't match. Enhanced warriors training with techniques baseline soldiers couldn't survive against. Enhanced humans living centuries while baseline humans lived decades. And somewhere in darkness, Prometheus teaching iron to baseline human who might save his people or doom them all. Six domains are converging. Partnership straining. Scarcity approaching. The first trigger point arrived precisely as Nix had calculated 50 years ago. And the founder was too weak to stop what he could still see coming. Gilgamesh closed his eyes, accepting that death would arrive before resolution. That he built insufficient institutions, trusting future generations to improve them. That partnership survived because he'd fought for it, but that partnership's future depended on choices others would make after he was gone. Biology didn't negotiate with ethics. Partnership didn't override biology. Institutions couldn't prevent capability from producing outcomes. But institutions could require choosing justice despite capability. It could make hierarchy visible rather than natural. Could force a conscious decision rather than assume biological determinism. That was worth building. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for having attempted, even when the outcome remained uncertain. The partnership continued. The consolidation continued. The choice continued. And the founder prepared to die, having done what he could, knowing it wasn't enough, hoping it was a sufficient foundation for others to build upon after he was gone. The resource crisis proves that constitutional frameworks addressed political consolidation but missed economic consolidation. Enhanced families stockpiled bronze legally. Baseline families suffered economically. Information advantage through biology became market manipulation through coordination. Not a conspiracy, just all enhanced populations recognizing patterns simultaneously that baseline cognition couldn't match. Political equality maintained. Economic inequality emerged. Partnership survival is declining from 51% to 43%. Tolkien documents everything for the order. The pattern is clear: solve one crisis, reveal the next. Work never finished. But before economic amendments can be debated, personal tragedy strikes. In Chapter 12, Gilgamesh's death, the partnership loses its founder after 90 years of choosing equity over efficiency. Succession tested. Frameworks challenged. Survival uncertain. Join us next time.